we're just publishing in the latest Media International Australia journal that I published an article which did some research in 2010 and 2011 with people who got the NBN early to trial suburbs. And they were talking to the people about how they were using the NBN, and it had made no difference. They didn't know what it would do. They had no idea of the capacity, so they were still just paying their bills and doing their online banking, and had no idea or what to do.
That's like one of my friends who got it and was complaining it didn't work, but it wasn't the NBN. It was his wireless modem in his house. And when we all pointed that out to him, we were just screaming at him, fix your modem.
But apparently it's going to roll out as far as Cornwall. I'm in the northern
Yes, I'm
suburbs.
getting it at Cornwall.
And you're in Cornwall.
Yeah, I'm
it's
excited.
Not going to where I am. So it's kind of going so far and no further. When you're ready, sorry, we're just chatting amongst ourselves.
We're getting ready on a line connection.
And may I just say that I think your sartorial elegance is just very dapper. Absolutely. You've definitely dressed up.
Keeping calm, right?
I'm glad to see that Jack just maintained cool, so Somebody tweeted whether there was going to be a dress award for the bloggers. And I said, no, brilliant. We're not going to have a red carpet again. Oh, yeah. I have people's gay friends in Brisbane who got married and one gay male friends, and they didn't actually red carpet. They were from and they actually had the photography students on the red carpet doing the live. And I was deliberately fake immune to or
Okay, just before we start with the hashtags that you're using, if you put BCM110 as well, because other people have been hashtagging moral panic, not sure what about, but yeah, just so we can, any questions you have or anything you want to say, if you put it up on there and then we'll address that, and you're welcome to say anything out loud as well after we've finished up. Crisp. We already?
Yeah.
Okay. The media throughout history has had a powerful role in shaping people's opinions. This role has often created a moral panic in society. Moral panic is this intense feeling expressed in a population about an issue that appears to threaten social order. Ever since 9/11, the mass media has been commenting on terrorism and the fear of terror imminent in society. But the media has been misrepresenting war and conflict long before 9/11. We first look at the Vietnam War, the uncensored war, and how iconic images and propaganda have been used by the media. We then look at the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and how censorship and mediation is used in representing war and conflict in the media. The Syrian war is used as an example of how propaganda can be used to shape people's opinions and create moral panic. Our last example is of how online media, such as Twitter and Reddit, are used in contrast to media giants in representing war and conflict.
The horrors of war are projected and engraved into those who partake in it, whilst the monstrosity of war is commonly misunderstood or underappreciated by the average citizen. In past, the conflict had always been merely visualised by the people who weren't manning the front lines, with tales of its hardships travelling through written texts and word of mouth. The Vietnam War changed this and for the first time allowed people to witness the gruesome events right in the comfort of their living rooms, giving them an insight into the true turmoil of war and conflict. The Vietnam War began in 1955 and continued until 1975. It was one of the most publicised wars in history, impacting greatly on the role of media and coverage on modern times. Capitalist South Vietnam had the support of anti-communist areas such as the US and Australia, though its broadcast and television negatively impacted this. Prior to the Vietnam War, the role of media in English and non-English speaking countries was to keep the public informed of major events of the war, but also to establish and maintain a sense of optimism that troops would safely return home and that the Allies were winning. Throughout the period of the Vietnam War, war outlets began to report the true nature of war, allowing violent images to be shown on television and for death tolls to be released. This spurred public doubt and was the origin of the idea that the war was lost on the home front. The war wasn't lost on the home front. Walter Cronkite was a man who had significant influence over the public, as he was a popular broadcast journalist, and claimed that the war is unwinnable, swaying the general opinion of the people.
For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
Cronkite's unprecedented commentary turned public opinion against the war, and weeks later, President Johnson announced he would not seek a second term.
Bias is evident in the media, even today, as the journalistic code of conduct has many loopholes, allowing outlets to skew the intention of sources by taking them out of context. The Vietnam War saw a lot of this practice, where media outlets would use the idea of brutality to create a particular image. It was named the Uncensored War by numerous sources, which even through the filtering of the media remained true in a sense. Iconic images and propaganda are main aspects that stick with people long after war's end, and the Vietnam War saw a lot of it. The image of a young girl running naked, fleeing with a look of terror on her face was to become one of the most controversial photos taken at that time, illustrating to people at home the true viciousness of war. This image shows that the lack of censorship leading to moral panic during the Vietnam War left a negative footprint on the public sphere and helped shape media coverage in more recent events. The time frame of the 50s through to the 70s saw the mainstream introduction of television into suburban homes, which gave the media another platform in which to report news. Newspapers and radio broadcasting were still popular, though in comparison to today's society, didn't provide extensive coverage and the ability to analyse different perspectives of news sources. The introduction of the internet and social media such as Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter allow people all over the world to have unprecedented access to first-hand footage and unopinionated sources, allowing them to develop their own opinion of major events. Wars no longer receive that degree of attention out of fear that the ramifications of doing so will be similar to the ones seen in the Vietnam War. Dispute in Iraq, Syria, and the USA have mimicked the ideas of censorship and moral panic believed to be present in media coverage of Vietnam, and are prime examples of media's involvement in war and conflict.
The War on Terror is the term commonly used to describe the military efforts of America and its allies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Arguably America's biggest military venture since Vietnam, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars are being waged in a time where media outlets have realised the extent to which the power and influence they hold affects the masses, and how even the smallest amount of information being released to the public through media can create various reactions, both good and bad. When we look at the simplest forms of semantics, we can see how certain trends in media has changed the way in which it shapes our outlook on war and conflict. For example, how have images of soldiers overseas come to represent or remind us of signs of resilience and hope, rather than represent the initial destruction that instigated war or the pain and suffering it is still causing today? As Monika stated, our interest in overseas conflict compared to Vietnam is significantly lower. And part of that is because of what media shows and doesn't show us, through censorship and mediation. Our knowledge of the war and conflict is not first-hand. What we see of the world around us is conveyed to us after going through heavy censorship and mediation. This has been essential to keep the war on terror afloat. If something that puts the US and its allies in a negative light is shown, the public's morale and support of the cause decreases. Conversely, if a US military success or capture or takedown is broadcast in the media, it compels the public to believe in the cause. Almost every major news outlet, especially American outlets, censor a lot of civilian death, battle losses, and damage to buildings overseas to keep the focus of the public on the positives of the war on terror. A sad example that I've found is that it took Catherine Bigelow's Zero Dark 30 for me to realise the collateral damage of Osama bin Laden's assassination. The mainstream media outlets were constantly broadcasting shots of celebrating Americans, and I never saw an emphasis on the fact that there were 4 more deaths in that building on that night, and countless lives were changed forever. The technology used to create influential media in the Western world has also been used to great effect by terrorist organisations such as Al-Qaeda. Since the internet has made almost all media that has been created available to everyone with internet access, video and audio recordings such as Osama bin Laden's have come into the public sphere, creating a much stronger sense of moral panic than in any conflicts that had come previously. However, news outlets still manage to find a way to mediate what the public sees.
Osama bin Laden, #1 on everybody's most wanted list in the world today, is saying that once again that he did not do it. Don't hold him responsible. He's not guilty. He, of course, is the man that has been fingered by just about everybody in the world, and now he's released a statement really underlining that he had nothing to do with it. So let's go through the statement. There's some interesting aspects to this. He said, after the recent attacks which the U.S. has witnessed, the U.S. government ventured to point fingers at me, accused me of involvement. The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attack it, that is the United States.
When I searched YouTube for an original footage of Osama's recordings, the vast majority of the results were American news stations rebroadcasting the footage with their own editing, effects, and context. The context of the message is changed from an international criminal stating his case to an almost patronising tone of a news presenter playing down Osama's significance. It's almost as if it's saying, don't worry, America's got this. This isn't to say that untouched by a second party, Osama's recordings would have shed him in a positive light. In fact, there's a good chance it would do the opposite. The point to make here is that if we choose to be dependent on mainstream media, we are not receiving the information without a filter. However, as is common with nearly all forms of control and authority, there are those who are fighting the media's censorship and mediation, especially when it comes to war and conflict. There are certain online broadcasters whose aim is to eliminate the stranglehold mainstream media has over coverage of these issues. LiveLeak is a video hosting website that has an array of raw footage from various happenings in the world and is an example of a very different form of the public sphere to mainstream media. There is almost no moderation in regards to the video content on LiveLeak, and as such, parts of war, conflict, and a variety of other issues that would otherwise be censored in mainstream media are available for the internet community to view at their own free will. There are countless videos of soldiers on both sides from Afghanistan and Iraq in a variety of situations, a lot of them confronting and violent, but also a lot also intriguing and revealing. The fact that content can be, and often is, graphic and shocking in nature is something to be very aware of, but by browsing LiveLeak, users are being shown what is actually occurring in the conflicts at hand, with no mediation or censorship, an extreme contrast to mainstream media. This brings us to where we are now in mediation, censorship, and the media climate as a whole. This is a map of the world displaying the concentration of tweets made in English. The next slide shows the correlation between these tweets through retweets. As Rachel and Wally will show you, the way we get our information is now evolving. We are transcending the censorship and mediation we have grown used to, and are finding knowledge with no filter but our own. For good or bad, our sense of moral panic is beginning to be mediated by ourselves.
Next, we look at the example of the Syrian war and how propaganda has been used to represent conflict. Propaganda within the media can help to shape moral panic surrounding war. Propaganda involves this idea of people rallying behind a cause, but often exaggerating, misrepresenting, or even lying about the issues in order to gain support. If you look at Syria's current war, propaganda has been an integral part of creating moral panic throughout the world. Syria's turmoil began with protests against President Bashar al-Assad's reign in March 2011, when the Syrian army was deployed to stop the uprising. It evolved into a rebellion, the rebels versus the government. The growing danger to foreign journalists and the media made the media reliant upon footage from people on the ground, from citizen journalists. Videos posted to the internet played a key propaganda role in Syria's bloody civil war. But are these videos reliable? Propaganda techniques have been adopted by both sides, making it difficult to locate the truth and resulting in many misreports. One example is when a man called Denny, who was a reporter for CNN, asking for the US or Israeli military invasion. who later we found out to be an activist.
You say there could be as many as 200 dead just in the last hour or two? We have 200 dead in the last 3 hours. In the first half an hour, we got 40 dead. In the first half an hour. And we got the video of...
This footage shows Danny saying, "Well, let the gunfire sound then," and continues to show Danny preparing fake gunfire and information to support his cause. The second example shows footage supposedly captured by the rebels of the Syrian government burying a man alive. There are many questions about its credibility of the source and if in fact the rebels have created it as propaganda. It is too horrific to show, but it is still a very powerful source of creating moral panic. Activists have posted a variety of videos like these of alleged atrocities committed by the government forces, some even staged, and the rebels choosing not to show their own cases of torture and killings by their own side. This biased and one-sided representation makes it difficult for the media to represent what is truly happening on the ground in Syria. Syria's electronic army deployed by the government to sell the president's message online that he and his forces are the only power to lead the country. They have been hacking Twitter accounts and media organisations believed to be too pro-opposition. They have even hacked a BBC account and sent a horrific video of beheading to all the people subscribed to those BBC Twitter services. They have even hijacked the Onion's Twitter feed, have taken down Harvard's website, and even hacked the Associated Press Twitter account, causing major turmoil. The Syrian government, or possibly the rebels, have even cut off the internet to Syria. This is because it is a key tool in representing what is happening in Syria's civil war. The internet has allowed activists to broadcast subjective information to promote their cause. News sources such as CNN have been relying on this information and been unable to report the truth.
As what Rachel has showed you, the game has changed. We no longer receive all of our news from a man or a woman sitting behind a desk in a studio. We receive our news from a random man at the scene with a hashtag. News has become an open market to receive input from every direction. You, I, alongside everybody else, can contribute to the media landscape. Twitter has been a massive force in the efforts of making news live and constant. People are alerted to war and conflict via Twitter channels, with live updates from anyone who's watching and has an internet connection. Eric Qualman summed it up most elegantly. That's right. To be equated to something relevant, use the hashtag Boston bombings. It can also be used as a method to create mass confusion, as illustrated from this hacked tweet sent out by the Associated Press. Unbeknownst to me, I never knew there was a live feed variant of Reddit. However, once looking into it, we can see the future of information gathering as plain as day. Multiple users over different threads constructed a live feed over the events of the Boston bombings. Information was gathered from social media, police overwatch feeds, and people on the ground. It was a comprehensive and understandable live account of the events taking place, unlike conventional news channels, which were hours behind in their efforts. Updates like Update 15, numerous sources including scanners reporting secondary devices have been found unexploded, pleading with people to stay away from the area. These were not just thoughts collected from the air though. All updates were credited with a timestamp and original source. It was news in the rawest form we've ever seen it. This is where we link these two media to the theory of moral panic. Unlike CNN or other conventional news media, Twitter and Reddit delivered a unbiased news source, which was plainly about stating facts and attempting to find an answer as opposed to stirring the minds of the American populace into believing that further terrorist attacks were imminent. Moral panic was a term coined to represent the manner in which media giants show their news to their consumers. The same theory occurred in World War I, with the UK government portraying the Germans in a certain light in the hopes to evoke hatred or anger towards them. Again in the 1980s, with the HIV/AIDS virus spreading, being boiled down to them by the media as the gay plague. Of course, they had very little correlation, but the mass population believed it to be so. Then again, we see the reverse effects of moral panic in our video game industry. Games make it seem rational and normal to kill hundreds of opposing force operatives usually in places with an Arabian backdrop. Games like Call of Duty sensationalise video game violence and make this behaviour second nature to children and adults alike. Now, I don't believe there is a correlation between violence, video game violence, and real violence, but I do see a problem with games that set themselves inside of a still current war. Medal of Honor, for example, a title released in 2010. It's not surprising that we're seeing less and less games set in World War II now. The latest to leave it behind is Medal of Honor, which is set in a very current war of Afghanistan. This is a quote from an ABC video game show, Good Game. This to me seems like an attempt to justify the war in the minds of gamers who play it. To the developers, the current and ongoing war in Afghanistan is just a stage to place their agendas on, making the members of the public sphere adhere to their thoughts. But what does it all mean? It means we need to think and consider where our own opinions come from. We need to allow ourselves to justify why we think the way we do instead of someone on a screen telling us to think in their mindset. War and conflict have been shown in multiple ways throughout history, whether it be propaganda, social media, and more recently, video games. But our landscape of media is changing and growing faster than it ever has before. No longer do we have large corporations pushing their own agenda, we have everyday people reporting on events that are specific to them.
Did anybody tweet?
Does anyone have
I
Wi-Fi?
tweeted. I did a typo and I put BCN once.
BCN.
Oh, you did?
Sorry about that.
I thought I tweeted.
Moral panic, no question. Your turn, Dave.
Thank you, Courtney Brown.
Hey. Alright, does anybody have any verbal
Wait,
questions?
have a look at Moral Panic.
There's no
Yeah,
Wi-Fi. It's
Go to all. Have a look at Moral Panic. Yeah. See if. There you are.
Ah, here we go.
There we
In
go.
fact, reporting the bin and more
That was
sadly
Sue.
censored.
That was me. That was
Hacked
me.
my photo.
I hacked your Twitter.
Oh.
I just. It,
There you go.
yeah, there I am. I'm rowy. I'm rowy. Just the thing that people say about two gay bridges in Minneapolis. What now? What's that about?
Gold.
I was going to say we recently did a book called Remembering Television, and in it, a historian did a fantastic essay on the fact that in Australia, the coverage of the Vietnam War was actually quite heavily censored because they didn't want Australia to see as much. So in fact, you saw more in America than you actually saw in Australia, and that often happens. Or it happened in the past, but the question is whether that will continue to happen in the future because so many people have got more access. Any other questions for? What have you got there?
Gold.
Off topic.
Moral panic.
Get this. We can demonstration. No questions. Your questions are making asking for this. Nice one, Courtney. Thank you.
Courtney.
I don't have a question, but I thought it was a great presentation. I really liked it. Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, well done.
Cool beans, thanks.
That was very good. Okay, it's 9:12. I think that would be putting you under just a little bit too much pressure to do it in that time. So, can you do it again next week?
Take the week.
Take the week.